I feel the heavy air pressing down on me in my therapy room, my hands trembling uncontrollably as I clutch my knees. My mind races, every fiber of my being trembling with the weight of what I'm about to say, yet I know I can't hold it in any longer. My voice cracks as I finally spill the truth I've guarded for so long. I killed him. The words hang in the silence, sharp and piercing, like a blade slicing through the fragile veneer of my composure. I see the shock flicker across my patient's face, but I can't take them back now. The confession is out, raw and unfiltered, driven by a mix of rage, grief, and a hunger for justice that's consumed me for years. As I speak, my mind flashes back to that night, an explosion of violence I thought I had buried deep beneath layers of therapy sessions and counseling. The memory is vivid, the cold, calculating way I tracked him down, the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I confronted him in that abandoned warehouse. I remember the way his eyes widened with terror as I forced him into a corner, voice trembling but filled with icy resolve. "You think you can get away with it?" I had hissed, my fingers clenched around a rusted knife. The last thing I saw before I plunged it into him was the flicker of betrayal in his eyes. He had, after all, revealed everything during that session, that cruel, calculated move that shattered whatever shred of humanity I had left. My hands tighten into fists as I recall the moment he confessed, a sick smile curling on his lips. "You know I did it. I planned it. That's why I came here. Thought you'd see the truth." His words were a knife twisting in my gut. The betrayal stung worse than the act itself. I had shared my burden with him, trusted that our sessions would be a refuge, and he repaid that trust by tearing my world apart. But in that betrayal I found a twisted clarity. The rage I'd buried beneath years of therapy erupted, and I took my vengeance. I see his face now in my mind, pale, pleading, a reflection of the man I once thought I understood. I remember the rush of adrenaline as I drove the knife into his chest, the sound of my own breaths ragged and uneven. I hadn't hesitated. I had only wanted to punish him for what he did to my brother, for stealing his future, his life. That moment of brutal justice was like a release, an end to years of helplessness, to the endless nights of haunted memories. Now sitting here, I realize that my confession has shattered the fragile boundary between therapist and executioner. I look into my patient's eyes, expecting judgment or horror, but all I see is a strange silence, an acceptance, perhaps a reflection of my own darkness. I can't deny that I feel a strange relief, a catharsis that has been building for years. My voice drops to a whisper, almost a confession to myself. He revealed everything during that session, and I couldn't let him get away with it. I had to stop him. The room feels colder, the shadows lengthening as I grapple with what I've done. It's as if a part of me has finally surfaced from the depths, an impulsive, vengeful side I thought I had tamed through therapy, but which had only been lying dormant beneath the surface. I wonder if healing is truly possible when I've crossed this line, when I've become the very thing I once feared. Yet in that moment of brutal honesty, I realize that I am no longer just a therapist. I am the executioner of my own pain, my own justice, and perhaps my own salvation. As I sat in that dimly lit room, my eyes fixated on Mark Reynolds, I felt an eerie shift in the air. His smile, subtle yet knowing, sent a chill down my spine. It was as if he held a secret, something that pierced through the veneer of our carefully constructed facade. I could see the flickering candlelight reflecting off his eyes, and I knew he was watching me as much as I was watching him. My pulse quickened, not from fear, but from an overwhelming rush of adrenaline, an intoxicating wave of raw emotion that threatened to drown my senses. I clenched my fists, feeling the muscles tighten beneath my skin. My mind raced back to that moment in the therapy session, the confession that shattered my sense of control. His words had slipped out, trembling yet revealing the dark truth I had long suppressed. I had expected remorse, maybe guilt, but what I encountered was something else entirely. Defiance, a twisted satisfaction that seemed to echo back at me. As he looked at me, that enigma of a smile curling on his lips, I felt an internal conflict surge. A part of me wanted to recoil, to deny the truth that had been laid bare. Yet another part, louder, more insistent, wanted to embrace it. I realized I was standing at the precipice of my own morality, teetering between justice and vengeance. The voice inside me, once silenced by years of training and self-control, now clamored for release. I remembered the night I had taken that knife, the rush of power that coursed through me as I pressed it against his chest, the way I had seen the darkness flicker across his eyes, an acknowledgement, perhaps, that he understood what I was capable of. That memory burned brighter in my mind now, fueling a strange sense of catharsis. I had done what I couldn't in daylight, what I had hidden from myself. I had taken justice into my own hands. The room grew heavier with unspoken truths. The shadows seemed to stretch closer, whispering secrets I was only beginning to comprehend. I questioned whether this act of vengeance had freed me, or chained me further into a cycle of darkness. Deep down, I knew I was no longer merely a healer. My profession was a mask I had worn to suppress the monster within. Now that monster had stepped forward, unmasked, unashamed. I could feel the weight of my confession, how it had cracked the fragile veneer of my facade. I was no longer just the therapist who listened, who guided. I had become the executioner of my own pain, my own sense of justice. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for my glass, the cool liquid offering a fleeting distraction from the storm inside. And yet amidst that turmoil, I felt a strange sense of liberation. A liberation born from honesty, an acknowledgement that sometimes healing and destruction intertwine, two sides of the same coin. Mark's smile lingered in my mind, a silent testament to the darkness we both harbored. I wondered if he knew, or if he simply saw the darkness in himself reflected in me. In this moment I understood that the boundaries I once believed in had dissolved. The line between therapist and monster had blurred, and I was left staring into the abyss, knowing that my actions had irrevocably changed me. I wondered if I could ever find redemption, or if I had already crossed the point of no return. All I knew was that tonight I had embraced my true self, flawed, vengeful, and finally painfully free. I sat there, the silence stretching between us like an unbreakable chain. The air felt thick, suffocating in its heaviness, yet I couldn't tear my gaze away from him. His eyes, those cold, unwavering windows, met mine with an unsettling calm, as if the storm inside him had long since settled into a quiet, deadly certainty. I had thought I knew him, understood his silence, his guarded demeanor, but now the cracks in that facade revealed something far more devastating. He took a slow breath, almost savoring the moment, and then, with an eerie serenity, he opened his mouth. His voice, when it finally came, was disturbingly composed, almost peaceful in its delivery. "I killed Daniel," he said, each word like a drop of poison slipping into my mind, corrupting everything I believed to be true. The world around me seemed to collapse inward as his confession sank in. My heart thundered, a relentless drum echoing through my skull. For a second I convinced myself I was hearing a lie, that this was some cruel joke, some twisted game to test my sanity. But the sincerity in his eyes, an unwavering, unrepentant gaze, made it clear. This was no fabrication. This was the brutal truth. The room spun slightly, and I felt my hands clench into fists without realizing it. My mind raced back to that night, Daniel's scream piercing through the darkness, the shadows swallowing the truth I'd refused to see. I remembered the chaos, the helplessness, but now that helplessness was replaced by a cold, consuming fire. A fury I had tried to suppress, a darkness I thought I had buried deep. I wanted to scream, to shout that I hadn't expected this revelation, that I had come here seeking answers, seeking reassurance. Instead, I was met with the grim reality that the man sitting across from me was the murderer, my brother's killer. And in that confession, I felt a strange sense of clarity, a twisted liberation I couldn't quite explain. The lines I had drawn in my mind, those boundaries I believed defined my morality, disintegrated in that moment. I realized I'd been fooling myself all along, cloaking my own darkness behind a facade of professionalism. My role as a therapist, a healer, was a mask I had worn to hide what lurked beneath. Now the mask was slipping, revealing a version of myself I had never dared to confront. A surge of conflicting emotions washed over me. Anger, betrayal, sorrow, a gnawing hunger for vengeance. The need to act, to punish, clashed painfully with my residual sense of morality. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears as the temptation to do something, anything, became almost unbearable. But beneath it all, a strange calm settled in. This was truth, raw and unfiltered. It was a catharsis I couldn't deny, a moment that would forever alter my understanding of justice. I stared at him. at the man who had shattered my world with that one confession, and wondered if I could ever forgive what he'd done, or if forgiveness was even possible anymore. He sat there unflinching, waiting for some response. I opened my mouth, but no words came. Instead, a cold resolve took root inside me, rooted deep in the unspoken understanding that I had crossed a line I could never uncross. I had been a healer, a protector, but tonight I had become something else entirely, something darker, something more honest. In the flickering candlelight, I saw the shadows dance once more, masking my own concealed darkness. I realized I had been searching for meaning in a world that no longer held it. The truth was brutal, and I had embraced it. Now I was left to grapple with the aftermath, with the weight of knowing that my journey into this abyss had only just begun. And as I looked into his eyes, I felt a strange, bittersweet relief. It was freedom. Freedom from pretenses, from illusions, from the lies I had told myself. I had finally confronted the darkness, not just in him, but within me. And somehow that made me feel both broken and alive at the same time. As I sat there in the dim glow of the candle, my mind was a whirlwind of chaos and clarity. His words, trembling and raw, echoed in my ears, an unfiltered confession that shattered the fragile barrier between my professional facade and the tumult raging inside me. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat a deafening reminder of the storm within. The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating, until he looked up at me with eyes that betrayed a vulnerability I'd never seen before. I wanted to break. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything that could distract me from the truth now laid bare between us. Instead, I sat motionless, gripping the edge of my chair as a dark tide threatened to swallow me whole. The revelation had hit me like a lightning strike. My own patient, the man I'd tried to help, was a murderer. My brother's murderer. A flicker of something primal, something dangerous surged within me. I was acutely aware that I had been trained to control my impulses, to uphold morality, to heal. But tonight, those boundaries blurred and a different part of me stirred, an instinct I had long suppressed. I saw red, not just anger, but something darker, a craving for retribution that had quietly taken root beneath my veneer of rationality. My mind raced back to the moment I first learned about my brother's death, how the grief had consumed me, how the injustice gnawed at my soul. And now, hearing the truth from the very mouth of the man who had taken him away, I realized that my desire for vengeance had grown into an unbearable weight. It clawed at my insides, demanding release. There was a strange, sick clarity in that confession. It stripped away the illusions I clung to, the idea of justice, the hope for redemption. In its place, I found a grim understanding. Sometimes justice isn't served by courts or words, but by actions rooted in the raw truth of human nature. I could feel the boundaries of my morality dissolving, replaced by a visceral urge to make him pay. The room contracted around us, shadows from the flickering flame stretching and twisting. I could almost see the ghosts of my past, my idealism, my vow to be a healer, fading into the darkness. That vow had been a lie, a mask I wore to suppress the primal instincts that always lurked beneath. Tonight they had come roaring to the surface. I watched him, searching his face for remorse or fear, but instead I saw a flicker of resignation. It was as if he already knew what was coming, as if he had prepared himself for the consequences of his truth. I felt an overwhelming pull, an irresistible temptation to act, to take justice into my own hands, to punish him for the pain he had caused. The impulse was intoxicating, almost euphoric. In that moment I questioned everything I stood for. Would I become the monster I secretly feared? Or could I find a way to channel this darkness into something else, something less destructive? The line between right and wrong blurred so completely that I wondered if it had ever truly existed. Perhaps morality was just a fragile veneer, easily shattered under the weight of truth. I could sense the shift within me, a silent acknowledgement that I was no longer merely a healer. I was something else, something darker, something unrecognizable even to myself. The temptation to confront him physically, to exact a personal vengeance, was almost overwhelming. I could see myself stepping over that line, crossing into a territory from which there was no return. But even amidst the chaos, a fragment of restraint flickered. I knew I couldn't simply act on impulse, not without consequence. Yet the urge to do so burned like wildfire within me. fueling the storm of conflicting emotions. I was caught in a paradox, craving justice yet fearing the irreversible damage my actions could cause. The room seemed to lean in closer, the shadows whispering secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. My hands trembled slightly as I fought to maintain control, to suppress the primal urge that threatened to burst forth. My eyes fixed on his, those eyes that had once sought sympathy, now reflecting my own tumult, my own darkness. And in that silent, charged space, I made a decision, one born not out of morality but out of necessity. I would not let this confession be the end of my morality, but I could no longer deny the truth that had been lurking beneath the surface. I realized that I'd been teetering on the edge of something unthinkable, and tonight I took a step closer to embracing it. Vengeance, I knew, was a poison that would consume me if I let it. But for now I allowed myself this moment of raw honesty, the acknowledgement that my desire for justice was intertwined with my own darkness. I could feel it coursing through me, a dark river that threatened to drown my better angels. And as I looked into his eyes, I knew this was only the beginning. I'd crossed a threshold, and the aftermath would haunt me forever. As I sat in that shadowed room, the flickering candlelight seemed to pulse with my racing heartbeat, casting elongated shapes that teased my mind with visions of what I was about to do. My breath grew shallow, each inhale feeling heavier than the last, as if the air itself had thickened with anticipation and dread. The silence was oppressive, yet underneath it, a whispering voice grew louder, one that urged me to act, to finally confront the darkness that had been gnawing at me for so long. His confession still echoed in my mind, a trembling admission that had cracked the fragile veneer of his composure. I watched him, eyes glinting in the dim glow, noticing every tremor in his voice, every flicker of guilt that he tried to suppress. It was as if a switch had been flipped inside me, revealing a buried part of myself that I had long kept hidden, an insatiable hunger for justice, or perhaps something darker, something unforgivable. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears, each beat a reminder of the moral battleground I was treading. My hands clenched involuntarily, nails digging into my palms as an ominous thought took root. How easy it would be to tip over the edge, to abandon the thin line separating vengeance from madness. The idea whispered cruelly, what if I didn't hold back? What if I let the storm inside me spill out and drown everything in its path? The darkness around me thickened as I pictured the consequences, possible, even probable. But it was an alluring darkness, one that promised power, release, a final act of retribution that would silence the ghosts haunting my conscience. My mind spun with visions of setting things right in my own way, of rewriting the story with my own hands. Regardless of the moral toll or societal judgment, I knew, in that suspended moment, that this wasn't about justice anymore. It was about something deeper, an instinct buried beneath layers of professionalism and control. I had always believed in healing, in guiding others through their pain. But tonight, I realized that sometimes healing meant confronting the darkness head-on, embracing the part of myself I had kept hidden even from me. The shadows seemed to lean closer, almost whispering their approval, as if they understood my silent vow. I closed my eyes briefly, weighing the consequences, feeling the weight of my moral compass teetering on the brink of destruction. This was no longer just about him. It was about me, about the thin line I had danced along for so long, now fraying at the edges. A surge of cold resolve washed over me, sharp and clear. I would not forget the pain he caused, nor would I let it fade into the past. Instead, I would carry it forward, transforming it into something irrevocable. The idea of revenge, of enacting a cruel justice, seemed almost inevitable now, an unavoidable truth that I could no longer deny. In that silent darkness, I made my choice. Not out of morality, but out of necessity. I could feel the darkness settling within, swirling and expanding, ready to consume me if I let it. And yet beneath that, a part of me clung desperately to the hope that this act, this final, irrevocable act, would be a form of liberation, freeing me from the chains of guilt and sorrow. As I looked into his eyes again, I realized I had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The line between healer and avenger blurred and vanished. I understood that this night would stay with me forever, etched into my soul as both a moment of profound truth and a silent confession. I had taken my vengeance. I had finally claimed justice for my brother, and perhaps in doing so, I had condemned myself to a darker path than I had ever imagined walking. I sit rigid, my hands trembling slightly as I clutch the edge of the table, fighting the urge to leap from my chair. Every muscle screams in protest, as if my body itself is resisting what I am about to do. My eyes flick around the dimly lit room, searching for an escape, a distraction, anything to break this suffocating silence. The faint scent of old paper and the faint hum of the city outside drift in and out of my consciousness, but they feel distant, like echoes from a world I no longer belong to. Mark's voice continues, calm and steady, echoing in my ears as if nothing has shifted. I want to block it out, to scream at him to shut up, but I don't. Instead, I listen, each word carving deeper into my conscience. He recounts the confession, the murder of my brother, his voice trembling with relief, guilt, or perhaps a strange sense of liberation. The words hit me like a blow, igniting a wildfire of conflicting emotions inside my chest. A part of me screams to act, to seize the knife I keep hidden in the drawer, to run my hands across its cold blade and let it do what my words cannot. That primal instinct, the one that has been buried beneath years of therapy and restraint, claws its way to the surface. The thought of meeting violence with violence, of punishing him directly, becomes an almost irresistible temptation. I can see myself in a blur of rage and sorrow, rising from this chair, my fist clenched, ready to strike. The blood pounding in my ears drowns out the words I know I must hear. Yet beneath that surge of primal need, a whisper of clarity persists. I remind myself of the moral boundaries I have sworn to uphold, of the fragile line I was supposed to walk. But what does morality mean now, when justice feels like a bleeding wound that refuses to heal? When betrayal cuts so deep that even my professional veneer begins to crack? The room feels suffocating. Every breath I take seems weighted, thick with the gravity of what I am contemplating. My mind flashes back to my brother's face, his smile, the way his eyes lit up in innocence, torn away from me in a flash. The pain of that loss is a wound that refuses to close. And here I am, sitting across from the man who confessed, the man who took him from me. I realize that the explosion of rage I feel is not just about revenge. It is about reclaiming a piece of my shattered soul. I clench my fists, nails digging into my palms, holding back the flood of anger that threatens to drown me. I feel my pulse racing, blood rushing in my ears as if the universe itself conspires to push me toward a breaking point. How easy it would be, how satisfying to let it all out, to unleash years of suppressed pain. But then I think of the aftermath. The blood, the screams, the irreversible damage. Would I become the monster I so despise? Is this justice or just another form of destruction? Part of me knows that if I act on impulse, I risk losing what remains of my integrity, of my humanity. In that suspended moment, I see myself standing at the edge of a precipice, teetering dangerously between mercy and fury. My breath catches as I contemplate the darkness lurking beneath my surface, the one I have tried so hard to suppress. I am painfully aware that this is a crossroads. One path leads to vengeance, the other to redemption, however fragile. I close my eyes briefly, swallowing the tumult inside. When I open them again, Mark's voice continues, a gentle reminder of the confession that has unleashed this storm. I see the flickering candlelight dance on his face, shadows flickering across his features like ghosts of past sins. I am acutely aware that every second I hesitate is a testament to the complexity of my moral struggle, the weight of my choices pressing down on me like a shroud. A deep, shuddering breath escapes me. I feel my resolve harden, not into violence but into a silent vow. I will not let this darkness consume me. I will find a way to bear the burden of what has been revealed, to carry the shame and pain without surrendering to the urge to destroy, because I know deep down that the true test of my strength is not in vengeance but in restraint. Yet even as I cling to that hope, a tiny, rebellious voice whispers that I am already lost. That perhaps tonight I have already crossed a line from which there is no return, and as Mark's words fade into the shadows, I realize with a shudder that I am no longer just a healer. Tonight, I've become something darker, something I might never understand. I sit in the dim silence of my office, the shadows from the flickering candle winking at me like silent witnesses to the chaos inside. Every detail of that night remains etched into my mind, The cruel, relentless scene that plays over and over, refusing to fade. The way Daniel's lifeless eyes stared blankly, as if he was begging for mercy from a world that had already forsaken him. His blood, hot and sticky, pooling beneath him in a grotesque testament to the fury I had unleashed. I can still feel the surge of rage that overtook me, a beast unleashed from its cage, craving justice in the most primal, unforgiving form. What had he done to my brother? The question pounds in my skull, echoing as if the sound alone could bring the truth to the surface. I remember the sickening crack of bone, the way my fist connected with his jaw, the sickening crunch that marked the end of his taunting, his lies, his cruelty. I told myself it was revenge, pure and simple. Yet, as I sit here trembling, I wonder if I ever truly believed that. Was it justice, or was it something darker, a thirst for retribution that had long ago mutated into something unrecognizable? The confession Mark revealed to me during therapy, the words spilled so casually, so unbecoming of someone who had committed such heinous acts, has shattered the fragile veneer of my composure. I never wanted to know this. My mind reels, trying to reconcile the man I thought I was with the monster I've become. The urge to hunt Daniel down, to make him suffer as he made my brother suffer, claws at my insides, relentless and unforgiving. I can't deny the intoxicating pull of that desire. It whispers sweetly in my ear, promising relief, justice, catharsis. I picture my hands quivering, trembling, yet so desperately eager to act. The years of therapy, the facade of calm, all of it evaporates in the face of this raw, unfiltered fury. I want him to pay. Not just for Daniel, but for every tear my family shed, every night I stayed awake, drowning in helplessness. But beneath the storm of my emotions, a faint voice warns me. It urges restraint, a plea to hold back what I already know I'll regret. I see the shadows lengthen around me, stretching into dark tendrils that threaten to envelop my soul. I wonder, am I already beyond redemption? The line between justice and vengeance has blurred so thoroughly that I no longer see the difference. The man who sat across from me, once a colleague, a confidant, is now a stranger I barely recognize. The urge to act becomes almost unbearable. I think of the tools I have at my disposal, my hands, my mind, and the temptation to let them do what they've always wanted. I replay every cruel detail of Daniel's death from that night. The way his blood splattered across the wall, the twisted expression on his face as life slipped away. Every moment is a fuel, feeding the raging fire within me, convincing me that he deserves nothing less than total destruction. Yet, I clutch at the fragile threads of morality that still remain. I remind myself that I'm supposed to be a healer, a person who mends wounds, not one who inflicts them. But what if this act, this final act of vengeance, is what truly heals? Isn't that what justice demands, payback in kind? I shudder at the thought, knowing that once I cross this threshold, there's no turning back. The shadows deepen, and I feel the weight of the secret I now carry. It's a burden that presses down on my chest, suffocating in its intensity. I want to scream, to run, to do something, anything, to escape the torment of my conscience. But I am rooted in place, immobilized by the enormity of what I am contemplating. The line between right and wrong has crumbled beneath my fingertips, and I am left grasping for some semblance of moral clarity that seems perpetually out of reach. In that moment, I recognize that I have become something else, a creature driven by darkness, masked by the veneer of my professional facade. The person I was is slipping away, replaced by someone I barely understand. The vengeance I crave is no longer about justice. It is about unleashing the fury that has been building inside me for years, a fury I once suppressed but now relish, almost with a sick sense of relief. As I close my eyes briefly, trying to summon control, I know deep within that this night will change me forever. The morality I cling to now seems fragile and fleeting, a thin veneer over an abyss I am teetering on the edge of falling into. I clutch my hands into fists, trembling with the desire to act, to end this torment that has haunted me for so long. But I also know with a terrible clarity that my true challenge is not in what I could do, but in what I must resist. The darkness calls to me, whispering that I am already lost, that I've crossed a line from which there is no return. And as I sit there, caught between my conscience and the primal urge for retribution, I realize with a shudder that I am no longer just a healer. I am something darker now, something I might never fully understand. something that threatens to swallow what remains of my humanity. As I slipped out of the consultation room, my breath hitched in my chest, and I kept my hands clenched tightly into fists, as if to keep some semblance of control. The shadows on the hallway walls seemed to flicker more aggressively now, echoing the chaos raging within me. The secret I had just uncovered, it felt like a weight I was never meant to carry, pressed heavily on my shoulders, yet it also ignited a fire that refused to be extinguished. I moved swiftly, my footsteps echoing softly on the cold tiles, but inside, my mind was anything but silent. The image of his trembling lips, the way he trembled as he revealed the details of his crime, replayed obsessively. I had known him only as a client, a man who sought help, but in that moment he became something else, a catalyst for my own retribution. His words unlocked a Pandora's box within me, unchaining years of suppressed fury. The corridors seemed endless, each step weighing more than the last. My mind raced with visions of justice twisted into vengeance, a bitter fruit I now craved, with an intensity that frightened me. What was once a desire to heal had morphed into an obsession with punishment. I caught myself glancing over my shoulder, paranoia prickling my skin. I felt exposed, vulnerable yet strangely invigorated. My hands, still trembling slightly, clenched tighter as I reached the exit. The night air hit my face like a slap, cold and raw, sharpening my senses. I wanted to scream, to run, to do something, anything to release this storm that threatened to consume me entirely. Instead, I took a deep breath, trying to ground myself, but the urge to act grew stronger with every heartbeat. This secret, the confession, had changed me irrevocably. It was like a seed planted deep within, sprouting tendrils of darkness that entwined themselves around my conscience. I knew that in revealing this, I had crossed a line I could never uncross. The morality I once held so dear was now a distant memory, replaced by a primal need for retribution. The words from that session echoed in my mind. I did it because he deserved it. Those simple words shattered any illusion I had about justice. They revealed the true nature of my own darkness, something raw and unfiltered, lurking beneath the veneer of my professional calm. I had always believed I was in control, that my empathy kept the darkness at bay. But tonight, I realized that darkness had been there all along, lurking beneath my guise, waiting for the right moment to surface. As I stepped into the night, I felt the weight of my secret settle more heavily on my chest. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, shame, relief, anticipation, and dread. I knew I had to conceal this confession, to hide the storm raging within me from the world, but a part of me reveled in the chaos. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years, as if a door had been flung open to a side of myself I'd always suppressed. The thirst for vengeance grew insatiable, a hunger that gnawed at my insides. I pictured the face of that man, the one who had taken my brother from me, and felt a perverse satisfaction that I would someday confront him. I knew that my next steps would be reckless, dangerous even, but I also knew there was no turning back now. The line I had crossed tonight was not just blurred, it was obliterated. I paused for a moment beneath the pale glow of a street lamp, feeling the cool night air seep into my bones. My thoughts raced ahead. What I would do next, how I would conceal this newfound darkness. I could feel it, like a virus infecting my soul, transforming me into something unrecognizable. The man I once was seemed distant now, a faint memory drowned out by the roaring urge for justice or perhaps revenge. In that fleeting moment, I accepted what I was becoming. The healer had vanished, replaced by an avenger I didn't fully understand. The moral compass I clung to so desperately was shattered, pieces scattered in the darkness I now dwelt in. And as I walked away from the only semblance of normalcy I'd known, I realized that this night had sealed my fate. I was no longer just a psychologist. I was something else entirely, something darker, something that would haunt me forever. As I sat in the dim glow of my living room, the shadows flickering across the walls seemed to pulse in rhythm with my pounding heart. Every nerve in my body was attuned to the quiet hum of anticipation, a sensation that was both exhilarating and terrifying. I had spent hours meticulously planning this moment, rehearsing what I would say, but now that it was imminent, words felt hollow, insufficient to contain the storm that threatened to burst free. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the glass of water on the table, though I knew I wouldn't need it. My mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts, fear, excitement, guilt, and an almost perverse anticipation. The truth had been buried beneath layers of rationalizations and lies, but tonight, that veneer was peeling away. I knew that what I was about to do would forever alter the course of my life, perhaps beyond repair. I stared at the door, as if the mere act of confronting what awaited behind it could somehow prepare me. I was acutely aware of the silence, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock, a reminder that time was slipping away, that the moment I had been waiting for was slipping through my fingers. I had always been a man of control, a healer who prided himself on understanding the depths of human pain, yet here I was, teetering on the edge of chaos. The memory of that confession still haunted me, the trembling voice, the raw vulnerability that had spilled out across my therapy table like a dam has broken. When he finally blurted out the truth, I felt a cold rush of shock, then a dark thrill that coursed through me like a drug. His words had shattered the illusion of safety, of justice, had revealed the monster lurking beneath the surface. I had always known deep down that justice in this world was often a fragile illusion, but hearing it spoken aloud, being told that he had taken my brother's life, awakened something primal inside me. A part of me had already begun to plan, to plot. That dark seed that had been planted in my mind months ago had grown into a vengeful tree, its roots twisting through my conscience. I could see his face vividly now, pale, trembling, the shame etched into every line. I remembered the rage that had simmered quietly beneath my skin, waiting for the right moment to erupt. That moment had come, and I had seized it without hesitation. My thumb brushed against the cold metal of the hidden knife I had concealed in my pocket, a silent promise to myself. The moment of reckoning was near. As I sat there, I felt a strange detachment, as if I was observing myself from outside my body, an actor playing the part of a man I no longer recognized. The line between justice and revenge blurred into a dark, indistinguishable smear. I knew I couldn't keep this secret anymore. The guilt and the rage had fused, creating a new entity that had taken root inside me. I felt the pull of that darkness, tempting me to act immediately, decisively. Every fiber of my being urged me forward, to end this chapter once and for all, to make him pay for what he had done. My eyes drifted to the photograph of my brother that sat on the shelf, frozen in a moment of innocence, in a smile that now seemed so distant. His face was etched into my mind, a constant reminder of what I had lost and what I was about to reclaim. I clenched my fists, feeling the cold grip of fury tighten around my chest. In that instant, I realized I was no longer a healer. I was something else, something darker, something that thrived in shadows and silence. The house was deafeningly quiet, each second stretching into eternity. My pulse thundered in my ears as I reached for the doorknob, the final step toward whatever fate awaited me. I knew that once I crossed this threshold, there was no turning back. The moral boundaries I once clung to had crumbled under the weight of my vengeance. The man I was, calm, rational, compassionate, was gone, replaced by a ghost driven by unrelenting fury. As I opened the door, a shiver ran down my spine, not from fear, but from an intoxicating sense of liberation. I was about to do what I had secretly yearned for, what I had justified in the deepest corners of my mind, an act of retribution that would forever mark me. I felt the cold steel of my resolve, sharp and unforgiving, matching the cold steel in my pocket. It was no longer just about justice. It was about reclaiming what was stolen, about punishing the darkness that had invaded my life. In that moment, I understood that my life had irrevocably changed. Whatever awaited on the other side of that door, I embraced it. The healer, the psychologist, the man I was, all of it was secondary now. I was something else entirely, something darker, something that would haunt me forever, echoing through the hollow chambers of my soul. And as I took the first step into the night, I knew this was no longer about revenge. It was about becoming something I could never undo. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the flickering fire inside me. My hands trembled slightly as I reached into my jacket, fingers searching for the small, cold object I knew I would need. Mark sat across from me, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior, his eyes darting nervously as he spoke, confessing things I had only suspected, but never truly believed I'd hear aloud. The candlelight played tricks on the shadows, elongating them across the wall like dark whispers of a secret I had kept hidden for so long. My mind reeled, memories flashing from the case files. The nights I stayed awake questioning my own sanity, the moments I'd wondered if justice was enough or if revenge had already seeped into my bones. When Mark's trembling voice uttered the words, the ones that shattered my fragile veneer, I felt the world tilt on its axis. The phrase hit me like a blow, not because I was surprised by his confession, but because I realized how deeply I had already condemned myself. I had been living in the aftermath, trying to piece myself together, convincing myself that my work was about healing, about understanding, about helping others confront their darkness. But tonight, I saw through that facade. My fingers closed around the cold steel tucked inside my coat, a silent promise I had made to myself long ago, before I even knew the depth of my pain. It was a reminder of the darkness I had fought against, of the fury I had buried beneath layers of professionalism. Yet here I was, poised at the edge of an abyss that beckoned me with its siren song. I could feel the weight of it pressing against my chest, urging me to act, to finally release the rage that had been simmering beneath my skin. Mark's confession spilled out in trembling words, a confession that should have brought relief, but instead ignited an uncontrollable fire. Every syllable felt like gasoline on the flames, already lapping at my insides. I saw him, not as a broken man desperate for redemption, but as the catalyst for the storm I had concealed for years. The memories of my brother's death, so raw, so violent, flooded my mind. The helplessness, the anger, the quiet despair that gnawed at me even during my most composed days. I clenched my jaw, trying to suppress the tumult within, but I knew it was futile. The veneer was cracking fast, my eyes fixed on Mark, but my mind was elsewhere, racing through the possibilities, the consequences. I knew what I was about to do would irreparably change everything. There was no coming back from this moment. Slowly I reached into my jacket, fingers wrapping around the familiar grip of the steel. The coolness was grounding, a stark contrast to the heat surging through my veins. I saw the flicker of fear in Mark's eyes, but I didn't care. The moral boundaries I had once held so dearly now felt distant, almost irrelevant. What I felt was a primal force, an urge that had been suppressed for too long, now unleashed. My voice was steady, but underneath, I felt the tremor of 1,000 suppressed emotions. "You don't understand what you've done," I whispered, more to myself than to him. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I knew I could end this tonight, finally, decisively. The thought of holding the steel, of making that final move, sent a shiver down my spine, not from fear but from a strange sense of liberation. As I hesitated, the weight of my decision pressed down on me like an iron vice. The man before me, the confessor, the murderer, was just a mirror, an echo of my own pain and rage. I wondered if this act would bring peace, or if it would plunge me into a deeper darkness I could never escape. In that suspended moment, I chose to act. My hand moved swiftly, not with the fury of a blind man, but with the calculated precision of someone who had already crossed the point of no return. The cold steel found its mark, and in that instant, everything changed. I saw the shock in Mark's eyes, the realization of what was happening. I felt the bitter taste of satisfaction mixed with a profound emptiness, knowing that I had finally let the darkness rule me. As I stepped back, the room seemed to close in, the shadows wrapping around me like a shroud. I was no longer the healer, no longer the psychologist. I had become something else entirely, the embodiment of vengeance, of retribution, of a grief so deep that it devoured any remaining shred of my former self. I watched as Mark slumped, the life fading from his eyes, and for a moment, I allowed myself to believe that justice was finally served. But deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning of a new chapter, one written not in healing but in shadows. Shadows that would haunt me forever, echoing the screams of my lost brother I could never bring back. As I sat there, the dim glow of the candle flickering over my face, I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, a relentless drum echoing the chaos within me. My eyes fixed on his trembling form, I finally summoned the courage to speak. My voice was steady, almost unnervingly so, as I declared, "I know the truth." He froze, eyes widening in shock, the color draining from his face, as a flicker of terror replaced the smugness that had haunted my thoughts for so long. The room suddenly felt colder, the shadows lengthening as if responding to the weight of my words. I saw the panic bloom in his eyes, a visceral, primal reaction that made the air between us thick with unspoken secrets. My heart hammered against my ribcage, a wild, erratic beat that threatened to burst from my chest. I could feel the adrenaline surge, sharpening my senses and igniting an undeniable resolve. For a moment, I was transported back to those dark nights when the pain of my brother's murder gnawed at my insides, relentless and unforgiving. Now standing here, I realized that the long-held desire for justice had morphed into something far more complex, something jagged and raw. I saw his trembling hands clutching at the edge of the table, as if anchoring himself against the inevitable. The tremor in his voice betrayed him, a stark contrast to the calm I fought to maintain. My mind flickered with memories of that fateful day, the day he took my brother's life without remorse, and I felt an overwhelming surge of rage that threatened to swallow me whole. Yet, beneath that surge lurked a darker temptation, an alluring pull toward vengeance, a whisper that perhaps this was the moment to end the cycle. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to lash out, knowing that this confrontation was more than just revealing the truth. It was about reclaiming my power, about finally confronting the monster that had haunted my nightmares. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, broken only by his stammered apologies and desperate pleas. I allowed those words to wash over me, fueling my resolve. This was my moment of reckoning, my chance to finally unmask the darkness that had long festered inside me. I stood slowly, my gaze unwavering, the flickering candlelight casting shadows that seemed to pulse with life. I felt a strange sense of clarity, a paradoxical mixture of liberation and dread, because I knew that once I revealed what I knew, there was no turning back. The secret I held, the truth I had unraveled, would forever alter the course of my life. My voice, when I finally spoke again, was low but resolute. "You thought you could hide forever," I said, voice trembling with a carefully concealed fury. "But I see everything now, and I will make sure the world knows what you did." In that moment, I realized that my desire for justice had become intertwined with a darker craving for retribution. I was no longer the psychologist who sought understanding and healing. I was something else, something fractured, something raw with the pain of a brother lost and the hunger for vengeance that refused to be silenced. As I watched his face contort with fear, I felt the weight of my decisions settle over me like an impenetrable shroud. I knew that the truth I wielded could destroy him, and perhaps me as well. But in this darkness I found a twisted sense of peace, the realization that sometimes confronting the shadows was the only way to truly see the light. As I sat across from him, the air thick with unspoken truths, I felt the weight of my decision pressing down on my chest. His trembling hands fidgeted with the hem of his shirt, eyes darting around the dim room, trying to find an escape that no longer existed. The candle between us flickered uncertainly, casting erratic shadows that seemed to mirror the chaos within me. I knew in that suspended moment that the mask I had worn as a psychologist was crumbling, replaced by a raw, unfiltered version of myself. He finally broke the silence, voice shaky but desperate. I didn't mean for it to go this far," he whispered, eyes pleading for mercy or perhaps for understanding. Those words, though laced with remorse, ignited a different fire in me, one that had been smoldering beneath the surface for years, buried under layers of professional decorum and suppressed rage. His apologies felt like a fragile veneer, a fragile facade that I was now ready to shatter. I leaned in, feeling the cold wood of the chair biting into my skin, grounding me amidst the storm. Every fiber of my being urged me to do what I had kept at bay for so long, to expose him, to punish him, to make him feel the same pain he had inflicted. I clenched my fists subtly, fighting the surge of adrenaline that threatened to overwhelm me. This was no longer about therapy or understanding. It was about justice, yes, but also about my own catharsis, about reclaiming the fractured pieces of my soul that his confession had shattered anew. My voice, when it finally emerged, was hoarse yet unwavering. "You believe that apologies can undo what you've done?" I asked, voice deliberately low, echoing with a controlled fury I had learned to mask in years of professional training. But beneath that calm surface, there was a tempest, something darker, something primal. I could feel it thrumming beneath my skin, urging me to act. He nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face now, the vulnerability laid bare. "I swear I never wanted to hurt him," he choked out, voice cracking. But I knew better. I knew that words, no matter how heartfelt, couldn't undo the damage. And in that knowledge, something shifted within me, a realization that I had been holding back, that my own pain, my longing for retribution, was finally priming me for what I was about to do. I reached into my coat pocket, my fingers trembling but precise, feeling the cold comfort of the small object I kept hidden there. A gun. The weight of it felt almost surreal, like a fragment of the darkness I had been suppressing for so long. The irony struck me, how I had spent years helping others confront their shadows, only to now embrace my own in the most visceral way. I stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. The moment had arrived. I looked into his terrified eyes, seeing the reflection of my own torment. And for a fleeting second I wondered if this would truly bring the relief I craved or condemn me to an even deeper hell. Still, I knew I couldn't walk away anymore. The floodgates had burst and I was drowning in my own fury. My voice was steady, cold. "You will pay for what you've done," I whispered almost to myself. Then, with a decisive movement, I pulled the trigger. The deafening bang echoed through the room, a loud, brutal punctuation to a chapter I could no longer contain. As the smoke cleared and silence fell like a shroud, I stared at his lifeless body, a strange mixture of satisfaction and horror washing over me. The deed was done. I had crossed a line I once believed I never would. My hands trembled, not from fear but from the weight of what I had just unleashed. In the aftermath, I felt a strange clarity, an unshakable sense that I had finally taken control of the darkness that had haunted me for so long. The guilt pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating, but intertwined with an odd sense of liberation. I had confronted the shadows, faced the abyss, and in doing so, I had begun to reclaim my fractured soul. This night would live forever etched into my memory, not as a moment of madness, but as the necessary act of a man who could no longer bear the burden of his own silence. The darkness had been mine all along, and now I had claimed it, not as a weakness but as my truth. And in that truth I found a twisted, frightening peace. The room felt heavier after the shot, as if the walls themselves were mourning what I had just done. I sank into the chair, my fingertips trembling as I reached out instinctively to steady myself. My mind replayed the sound, the crack of the gunshot, before everything descended into a suffocating silence. I looked across at Mark, whose pallor was nearly translucent, his eyes wide and unfocused, teetering on the verge of collapse. A sick wave of guilt crashed over me, sharp and relentless. Yet beneath that, I sensed an unsettling relief, an almost euphoric release from the tension that had built up for years. I had finally done it. I had freed myself from the nightmare that had haunted me since my brother's murder. But as I watched Mark struggle to stay conscious, I realized that the act I had committed was carving a deep scar into my soul. My eyes fixed on him, and I could see the tremors in his body, the shallow breath that came in ragged gasps. I was acutely aware of the silence afterward, broken only by the faint echo of my own pounding heart. I wanted to feel remorse, to be consumed by guilt, but instead a strange numbness settled over me, like a shell I couldn't crack open anymore. Was this what justice felt like? Or was it just the beginning of my own destruction? I reached out, my hand trembling as I gently touched his shoulder, feeling the coldness of his skin beneath my fingertips. For a moment I thought about stopping, about undoing everything I had done, but the words caught in my throat. The voice inside me, a twisted whisper, urged me to accept this act as the final act of my revenge, the ultimate punishment for a crime I'd spent so long pretending I could forget. As I sat in the dim glow of the candle, flashes of my brother's face flickered in my mind, his smile, his voice, the way he used to laugh at my silly jokes. I clenched my fists, feeling the rawness of my own fury still simmering beneath the surface. My heart was torn between the primal urge to escape the guilt and the cold certainty that this was what I needed, what I had to do. And yet, as the seconds ticked by, I sensed the fragile line I'd crossed. This wasn't justice. It was a descent into chaos, a surrender to the darkness I'd fought so desperately to contain. My conscience screamed for redemption, but my actions had sealed my fate. The man lying before me, his face slack and unseeing, was a mirror of my own fractured soul. In that moment I felt the weight of my own monstrosity, pressing down harder than ever before. I had wielded a weapon not just against Mark, but against myself. The fury that fueled my hand had blinded me to the destruction I was unleashing. I knew I could never take it back. The blood on my hands was indelible, staining every fiber of my being. A visceral ache gripped me, the kind that drags you into the depths of despair. I questioned whether I had truly found peace, or merely traded one nightmare for another. My mind spiraled into chaos. Visions of my brother's face, the screams I had silenced, the guilt that now gnawed at my sanity. Was I any different from the monster I'd sworn to destroy, or had I become something even darker? I looked at Mark's inert body and felt a cold surge of emptiness, as if a part of me had been severed, forever lost to the darkness I had summoned. The act of vengeance had come at a cost I was only beginning to comprehend. My body was numb, but my mind was aflame with regret, horror, and an inexplicable sense of liberation that I knew would haunt me for the rest of my life. And so, I sit here now, trembling and hollow, grappling with the aftermath. Whatever peace I initially thought I'd find in this act has morphed into a profound chaos, an internal war I don't know how to end. The line I crossed is etched into my soul, and I realize that I'm no longer just a healer or a man seeking justice. I am something else entirely, something darker and irrevocably changed. I sank deeper into the shadows, the heavy silence pressing against my skin like a suffocating shroud. My hands trembled as I clutched the cold, hard surface of the chair, my mind racing through the chaos of what I had just uncovered. The confession had spilled out involuntarily, a raw, unfiltered truth that now hung in the air like a toxic fog I couldn't breathe through. His trembling voice had broken the barrier I thought I'd maintained, an illusion of control, of moral superiority. Now I wondered if I had truly gained closure, or merely handed myself over to a darkness I had no escape from. The room felt suspended in time, the flickering candle casting elongated shadows that stretched across the peeling wallpaper, as if mocking my inner turmoil. I wanted to cry out, to deny what I'd just heard, but my throat was dry, constricted by a mixture of shock and a burgeoning sense of helplessness. How had I come to this point? Was I just a man seeking justice for my brother, or had I become something far more sinister? These questions clawed at my mind with relentless ferocity, refusing to let me rest. He looked at me with eyes that shimmered with a turmoil of regret and fear, an echo of my own soul. The truth he revealed was like a wound reopened. I could feel it burning deep within, a relentless ache that refused to heal. I realized that my desire for vengeance had been a fragile veneer, masking an obsession that grew roots in the darkest corners of my being. I had convinced myself I was righteous, that I was doing what was necessary, but now I saw only the hollow shell of that conviction. The line between justice and revenge had dissolved, leaving behind a fractured person staring into the abyss. My mind flickered back to the moments during the killing. The adrenaline, the heated rush of retribution, had blinded me to everything else. In that instant, I had felt powerful, uncontrollable, like I had finally seized the justice that had haunted me. Yet sitting here now, I recognized how hollow that victory was. It wasn't redemption, it was a descent into chaos. The blood on my hands was not simply a stain, but a mirror of my own corruption. Each beat of my heart echoed with the weight of what I'd done, a relentless reminder that no act of vengeance comes without a price. I shifted slightly in the shadows, trying to make sense of the storm inside me. The guilt was a living thing gnawing at my conscience, whispering that I had crossed a line I could never return from. But beneath that guilt, there was an odd, disturbing sense of liberation. Whether I wanted to admit it or not, I felt a strange clarity in embracing the darkness. The justice I sought had morphed into something else, something primal and uncontrollable. I wondered if, in some twisted way, I had become more honest with myself in this moment than I had ever been before. As I stared at the faint flicker of the candle, I felt the full weight of my actions settle over me. The man I was moments before, that healer, that seeker of truth, had dissolved into someone unrecognizable. I was no longer simply a man haunted by loss. I was a vessel of vengeance, a creature born from grief and rage. My mind oscillated between two realms, one where I justified everything I had done, and another where I was suffocated by the horror of it all. The silence around me grew deafening, punctuated only by my own ragged breathing. I knew that in the quiet aftermath, I would have to confront the monster I'd become. Would I ever find peace? Could I ever forgive myself? Or would I forever be trapped in this labyrinth of darkness I'd willingly entered? These questions circled endlessly, like vultures circling a carcass, waiting for me to succumb. I clenched my fists, feeling the cold sting of tears threatening to surface, but I held them back. I had to face this alone, with no one to save me now. In that moment, I understood something profound. The act of vengeance had not only taken my brother, but had also fractured my soul. I had gained a fleeting sense of justice, yes, but at an exorbitant cost. My conscience was scarred, my humanity diminished, and the shadows I once sought to dispel now clung to me like a second skin. Whatever semblance of redemption I once clung to had dissolved into the darkness I had created. The line between good and evil blurred into a murky abyss I could no longer escape. And as I sat there, cloaked in silence and shadows, I realized that I had stepped into a new reality, one where I was no longer a healer, no longer a man fighting for justice. I had become something else entirely, something darker, something I might spend the rest of my life trying to outrun. But deep down, I knew that the moment I crossed that line, I had forever lost a part of myself. The vengeance had been mine, yes, but it had come at the ultimate price, my own humanity. The nights that followed etched themselves into the fabric of my consciousness with relentless persistence. I found myself trapped in a cycle of sleeplessness, where the darkness of my room was only rivaled by the darkness dwelling within me. Every time my eyes closed, cruel images invaded my mind. Daniel's face, distorted in a mixture of fear and betrayal, haunted my every moment of supposed rest. It was as if my mind refused to let go, replaying the scene of that confession over and over, each iteration more vivid and visceral than the last. I questioned whether any semblance of justice had truly been served, my hands, still trembling from the adrenaline surge of that night, clenched into fists beneath the sheets. Had I acted out of righteousness, or had I merely fed the beast that was now gnawing at my soul? The answer was impossible to find in the darkness, where every thought seemed twisted and unreliable. Was I trying to heal, or was I simply punishing myself? The line blurred so completely that I could no longer tell where I ended and the darkness began. The image of Daniel's face would appear unbidden, flashing in my mind like a jagged scar. I saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the helplessness that I had once sought to understand through therapy, and now I viewed through a different lens. That face, so familiar yet forever changed, became a symbol of my own fractured morality. I had wanted justice, yes, but what I had actually achieved was a hollow victory. Hollow because it came wrapped in guilt and regret. It was as if I had thrown a stone into the mirror of my soul, shattering it into countless shards that cut deeper with each passing night. Sometimes I'd catch myself whispering into the dark, asking if this was truly the path I wanted to walk. The question echoed like an incantation, an invocation of doubt that refused to fade. Every decision I made since that night felt heavy, burdened by the weight of what I had done. I would think about the moment I pulled the trigger, the cold steel in my hand, the surge of adrenaline that drowned out all reason. I had told myself it was for justice, but deep inside I knew it was something darker, something rooted in revenge and fury that I could never fully suppress. My mind, once a sanctuary of reason and compassion, was now a battleground. I replayed the last session with Daniel, the look in his eyes when he finally broke and spilled his secret. I remembered the moment when I realized that the man sitting across from me had become both my victim and my accomplice. His words ignited a fire within me, an intoxicating mixture of pain, betrayal, and the sickening taste of justice. I had told myself that I was doing what needed to be done, that I was closing a chapter of pain. Yet beneath that justification lurked a darker truth. I was feeding my own shadows. As I stared at the ceiling, I could almost feel the ghost of Daniel's confession pressing down on me, urging me to confront the reality I had tried to ignore. Did I think killing him would bring peace, or was it merely a way to silence the relentless voice that accused me of complicity? The silence of the night became deafening, echoing my own doubts and fears. I questioned whether I had stepped over a line from which there was no return, whether I had become a monster cloaked in the guise of a healer. That confession, his trembling words spilling out in the dim candlelight, had unlocked something inside me I could neither control nor contain. It had been a catalyst, a turning point that set me down a road I now walked with trembling steps. The act of vengeance had been a purge, yes, but it had also left an indelible stain on my conscience. Each sleepless night was a reminder of that cost, a cruel punishment meted out by my own mind. I often wondered if I was trying to justify my actions or if I was merely punishing myself, hoping that guilt would somehow make me feel less culpable. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize, the truth remained. The cycle of hatred and retribution only deepened the wounds within me. I had reached a point where forgiveness seemed impossible, and redemption felt like a distant, unreachable goal. The face of Daniel, once a patient and a victim, now served as a haunting reminder of what I had become, an agent of darkness instead of light. I questioned whether justice had been truly served, or if I had merely perpetuated the cycle of violence. The answer eluded me, lost somewhere in the murky depths of my tormented mind. All I knew was that I had crossed a line irrevocably, and that each night I paid the price in restless, torment-filled sleep, and in the quiet darkness, I faced the brutal truth, that some wounds never heal, some scars are too deep, and some sins are too heavy to carry alone. I had sought justice, but I had only found myself drowning in the abyss of my own making. As I sat there, the shadows from the flickering candle seemed to stretch and curl around me, wrapping me in a cold, suffocating embrace. My mind was a maelstrom of conflicting feelings, remorse, justification, dread. I pondered whether this internal torment would ever subside, or if I was doomed to carry this burden for eternity. The weight pressed down on my chest, an invisible stone that grew heavier with each passing moment. I found myself returning to that night, how the lines blurred between my role as a therapist and that of a vengeful ghost. The memory of Daniel's trembling confession still haunted me. His words had broken the dam I had built around my conscience, unleashing a flood of rage I had long suppressed. In that vulnerable moment, I saw the truth. I was no longer the healer I once believed myself to be. I was something darker, something primal. My thoughts spiraled into the abyss of self-recrimination. Could I forgive myself for what I had done? Was there any ounce of redemption left for me? Or was I merely condemning myself to an eternity of remorse, a shadow wandering in the darkness I had created? I imagined what my life might look like if I let go of this guilt, if I found a way to absolve myself, or if I simply accepted the punishment I believed I deserved. The room around me felt stifling, the air thick with the scent of regret. I clenched my fists, feeling the cold sting of my nails digging into my palms. The act of vengeance had been both my salvation and my curse. It had quenched my thirst for justice, yet it had also ignited a fire within me that refused to burn out. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's face twisted in fear and shame, mirroring my own twisted reflection. I wondered if there was any hope left for redemption. Could I find peace in forgiving myself? Or was I destined to be forever shackled by the sins I had committed? The irony was bitter, how I had sought to restore balance only to tip the scales further into chaos. My mind kept returning to that moment, the breathless silence after the act, and the hollow feeling that followed. In those lonely hours, I questioned whether justice had truly been served, or if I had only become a monster cloaked in the guise of a healer. The lines between right and wrong had blurred so completely that I no longer knew where I stood. All I knew was that the guilt gnawed at me relentlessly, clawing its way through my conscience, refusing to let go. I looked at my trembling hands, remembering how they had trembled that night, how they had carried out the act I now regretted more than anything. Was this punishment enough? Would I ever find a way to forgive myself? Or was I doomed to carry this weight until the end of my days? The thought of endless remorse was almost too much to bear. I felt the sting of tears threatening to spill, but I fought to keep them at bay. Instead, I focused on my breathing, shallow and ragged, trying to find some semblance of control amid the chaos. I wondered if any part of me could ever be whole again. Maybe, just maybe, I had to accept that some sins left scars too deep to heal, and some wounds were meant to linger forever. As I sat there consumed by my own thoughts, a cold realization settled over me. This wasn't just about justice or revenge. It was about myself, about confronting the darkness I had hidden for too long. I knew that whatever path I chose next, I would carry this burden forever. The question was, would I find the strength to forgive myself, or would I remain trapped in this eternal prison of regret? I closed my eyes, trying to picture a future where peace might someday reside within me. But the image was faint, fragile. All I could see clearly was the truth I refused to accept. I had crossed a line from which I could never return, and the price I paid was a lifetime of guilt. The candle flickered again, casting fleeting shadows on the walls, a silent testament to the darkness I had unleashed and the hope I desperately clung to that someday. Somehow I might find a way to break free from it. I sat there, the room closing in around me, as if the walls themselves were leaning in, eager to hear my secrets. The candle's flame flickered erratically, casting jagged shadows that seemed to pulse with a life of their own, mirroring the chaos raging inside me. Every breath I took felt like a fragile act of defiance against the mounting hysteria threatening to engulf my senses. He looked at me with an intensity that was almost accusatory, though his words had only just begun to pour out. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms to anchor myself, to keep the storm from breaking free. I knew what was coming, felt it, a revelation that shattered the fragile veneer of control I desperately clung to. His trembling voice confessing the crime was like a detonating bomb in my mind, and I watched as my world crumbled piece by piece. A surge of adrenaline seized me, sharp and relentless. The walls of my rationality cracked, revealing a dark, primal instinct drowning out all reason. In that instant, I saw no longer a patient, no longer a man seeking therapy. I saw an enemy, a threat that had to be eradicated. My heart pounded fiercely, not with guilt or remorse, the feelings I expected, but with a ruthless, primal hunger for vengeance. My hand moved almost automatically, driven by some hidden impulse I had suppressed for years. I reached into my pocket, fingertips trembling as I grasped the cold, heavy object concealed there. The feel of it sent a strange comfort through my veins, an assurance that I could impose my own form of justice, whether it was lawful or not. As I drew closer to him, every breath seemed heavy with the weight of my decision, each second stretching into an eternity. His eyes widened in shock, recognition dawning as I revealed what I carried. I saw the flicker of terror, a mirror of my own dark reflection, before the inevitable happened. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint scrape of metal against fabric, the subtle sound of my own heartbeat deafening in my ears. I felt the rush of power surge through me, an intoxicating blend of relief and fury, all the rage I had suppressed for so long boiling over in that single act. As the deed was done, a strange calm washed over me, hollow but complete. The world around me seemed to blur at the edges, colors melting into shadows. I knew my life would never be the same. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the man I had been with the man I had just become. Was this justice, or was it something darker? A part of me whispered that I had finally stepped across a line I could never undo, that the vengeance I sought had become my prison. The room was silent except for the fading flicker of the candle, which now seemed to waver more violently, as if mourning the life I had just taken. I stared at my trembling hands, feeling their tremor not fade but intensify. I had just claimed a piece of myself, something I could never retrieve, and in that moment I understood that I had become something else entirely. Not the healer I once thought I could be, but a creature consumed by the shadows I had tried so desperately to ignore. I knew I couldn't hide from this anymore. The evidence was there, glaring and undeniable, threatening to spill over and expose me at any second. My mind raced, trying to think of a way to erase the traces, to cover my tracks before the world or my conscience caught up with me. Every second felt like a race against an invisible clock, each move more frantic than the last. The guilt gnawed at the edges of my sanity, gnashing and clawing, whispering that I had become a monster. Yet deep down a voice whispered something darker, something strangely satisfying. I had finally taken control, reclaimed a sense of power I had long been denied. But at what cost? As I sat there, trembling, I knew I was teetering on the edge of complete collapse. The facade of calm I desperately tried to maintain was cracking. I could feel the weight of my secret pressing down on me from all sides, suffocating, relentless. The truth was inescapable now. I had crossed a line, and no matter how much I wished to turn back, the path behind me was forever erased. I clenched my jaw, trying to steady my trembling voice as I fought the rising tide of panic. I was drowning in my own darkness, my own sins. The room spun slightly, and I wondered how much longer I could hold this charade together. The shadows on the wall seemed to mock me, reflecting the chaos I had unleashed within myself. I told myself I was still in control, yet I knew that control was an illusion. The evidence was hidden, yes, but not forever. Somehow I had to find a way to live with what I had done, to face the consequences that awaited just beyond my reach. Or perhaps the greatest punishment was already upon me, the unrelenting, gnawing awareness that I could never undo the act I had committed, that I was now a prisoner of my own dark deeds. And so I sat there, trembling, eyes fixed on the flickering flame, haunted by the ghost of what I had just done and what I had become. The night stretched before me, endless and unforgiving, bearing the weight of my secret and the chilling realization that I may have just sealed my own damnation. I approached the mirror with hesitation, my reflection a fractured mosaic of guilt and regret. The face staring back at me bears the marks of sleepless nights, etched deep into my skin like scars from battles I thought I had won. My eyes, once sharp with purpose, now seem hollow, floating in a sea of remorse. I trace the contours of my face, searching for something, anything, that might offer me peace, a fragment of solace amidst the chaos of my conscience. My breath catches as I examine the lines that weren't there before, the subtle sag of my jaw that betrays the weight I carry. I wonder how long ago I lost myself in that dark pursuit of vengeance, how far I've fallen from the person I once believed I was. The mirror feels like a trap, reflecting not just my image but the ghost of the man I used to be. Naive, hopeful, naive again, and now irrevocably stained. I lean closer, scrutinizing every detail, each wrinkle, each trace of the night's torment. As if by dissecting my face, I could unearth some hidden key to salvation. But all I find is the cruel truth. I'm a stranger to myself now. The eyes I see are bruised, not just by guilt, but by the realization that I have become something unrecognizable, something I feared even as I walked the path of revenge. A shudder runs through me as I recall that fateful night, the clandestine exchange, the cold resolve in his eyes, and my own trembling hands clutching the weapon. The moment of clarity, so sharply contrasted with the chaos that followed, when I understood that I had just annihilated what was left of my humanity. My brother's murderer had finally paid, but at what cost? The vengeance I believed would set me free only chained me tighter to this torment. I close my eyes, desperate to drown out the haunting images that flood my mind, the blood, the silence, the certainty that I had crossed into darkness from which there is no return. I had wanted justice, yes, but now I see that what I sought was a false salvation, an illusion that masked the deeper wound, the loss of my own soul. Turning away from the mirror, I let my fingers drift over my face, feeling the roughness of my skin, the trembling pulse beneath. I try to find meaning in the reflection, some semblance of redemption or acceptance, yet all I find is a hollow echo, a whisper of the man I once thought I knew. I question whether I have truly found peace, or if I have merely surrendered to despair, losing everything that once made me human in pursuit of the hollow triumph of vengeance. A part of me still clings to the hope that someday I might forgive myself, that the scars I see are not the marks of a man broken, but of a man who has endured. But another part, louder, darker, knows that the damage is done. I am forever altered, a fallen soul staring into a mirror that no longer reflects my former self, only the aftermath of my choices. As I stand there, the silence around me thickens, pressing in like a noose. I wonder if I will ever escape this prison of my own making. Will I ever find a way to reconcile the man I am with the man I once was? Or am I condemned to forever wear this mask of remorse, a constant reminder of a night I can never undo? The weight of my reflection presses down, heavy and unrelenting. I breathe out slowly, knowing that no matter how much I wish to turn back time, I am now irrevocably entwined with the darkness I created. Perhaps the only redemption left is acceptance. Acceptance that I am no longer the man I was, that I have paid a price far greater than any justice I could have achieved. And yet as I stare into the mirror, a flicker of something else stirs within me, an ember of hope, faint but persistent. Maybe, just maybe, The path to peace begins here, in confronting this broken face, in accepting the depths of my own darkness, and in daring to seek a sliver of light amid the shadows.